We're going to take and go to my next favorite organization. It's not a dating organization.
Can be.
Maybe. Who knows? If I write you a letter, huh? Right. What are all these songs about? I wrote a letter to my
Right. Mr. Postman.
You never know. Yes, we're going to. And Jim Kaufman is with me. He is the legislative director of the union. It's
APWU, American Postal Workers Union.
Right. And
Albany, New
because
York.
I don't want to get those letters mixed up, because every time there's 4 letters, I'm bound to get one flipped over. He's been on the show before. I find what's happened over the past few years with the Postal Service to be disheartening. And I think they've gotten a bad rap. And I think there might be a reason for that bad rap. There might be a Machiavellian reason for it. So tell us a little bit about this. This is part 1, because part 2 is going to be next week.
It's actually been going on since the Nixon administration, but the Postal Service the Post Office created in 1792, had been performing its mission quite well to bind the nation together, provide low-cost universal service.
Did they have the Pony Express?
That was not actually part of the Postal Service. That was a private carrier service. It didn't last very long. It just went between 2 different states. It was very limited in its scope. But they delivered mail by stagecoach, by train.
But that wasn't the Postal Service.
The train handled the Postal Service's mail. The stagecoach actually did too. They would transport mail from one town to the next. But the years went by and everybody was doing a good job. Everybody's happy. And then all of a sudden some light bulb went off in somebody's head that they realized that there's a lot of money to be made in that business, in that industry, even though the government wasn't making the money. At the time, it was being subsidized, so the stamps were very inexpensive. The services were cheap. But little by little, the corporate America tried to make inroads into that service.
So they started their own? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they started by outsourcing to these corporations, but this came after the strike. The strike occurred in 1970, where wages were so low that most workers had to work 2 jobs, and some qualified for welfare.
Really? That's the Post Office? Oh, I did not realize that.
Although they had labor organizations, they weren't allowed to collective bargain over wages, so
really?
They had to go to
Congress. That's the only thing you really,
that's what helps, you know.
Work conditions.
So they had to go to members of Congress, and members of Congress at the time were ignoring the request. So at one point, there was a meeting of over 2,000 letter carriers in New York City, where they decided to go out on a wildcat strike, meaning that the national union leaders were not in favor of it. It was illegal.
Oh, that's what a wildcat strike. I really did not know.
They went off on their own, and the national leaders were trying to get them to go back to work. They refused. It was not only it was illegal. They could have lost their jobs. They could have gone to jail. But the situation was so bad that one place after another just joined the strike. And before you knew it, the mail stopped dead. Now, this is an age before the internet, before people could wire money, but that was kind of a slow process. But at Wall Street
and they weren't ordering stuff online.
No, they couldn't. They could order anything they want on the phone, but it wasn't going to get there.
Yeah.
And so Wall Street started to feel the pinch. And that's when Nixon tried to move in with the National Guard. And after a few days, they realized they couldn't do the job because the knowledge was in the workers' heads. And they had to give in to the strikers. The strikers got a 12% wage increase right off the bat. They won collective bargaining rights. But on the other hand, there was something called the Postal Reorganization Act, which set the United States Postal Service, became out of the Post Office Department. It set them up on a break-even basis where they couldn't make money. They had to break even over a 10-year cycle.
And they had to turn money back into the government? I mean,
well, the government took it.
They took it, okay.
In the 80s, 1985, I believe it was, their earnings were put back into the federal budget, and it was a scam to make the budget deficit look lower. But the Postal Service needed those earnings to function. So there was a couple of fights that went on to get that out of off budget. So that was the first major hit. Then little by little, the contracting out began, where there were other carriers carrying letters and parcels and sorting mail. And it just kind of grew into its own industry, private industry. which harmed the postal workers because part of that Reorganization Act said that postal workers, through their collective bargaining, were not able to fare better than private sector workers.
Oh, wait a minute, that
Yeah.
doesn't make fun.
Well, it didn't seem as bad at the time because there was very little private sector workers doing that work.
Oh.
But as the industry grew, we had a heck of a time trying to get a raise in negotiations. And if it went to arbitration, the arbitrator would shut us down because, look, these guys are making minimum wage, doing the same work you're doing.
Except that they're really not doing exactly.
Well,
the
they're trying. I mean, they're doing sorting processes, they're doing delivery processes, but it held us down financially as workers for years because of that element of the Postal Reorganization Act. Also, it set the Postal Service up on a marketing system. Business-like, but it was supposed to be a service where the people's service was not to be hampered by the economic picture or anything like that, but it turned out it
It's
was.
a service it's, to me, this is no different, and I've said this before, it's like we have certain agencies, they don't have to produce money, they take money to continue their whatever
Right.
they do.
All we had to do was deliver the mail and provide services.
And that's
we
a
weren't
service.
supposed to be a Wall Street entity.
Yeah.
You know, so that was the first. Those were the first attacks on the People's Postal Service. Later on, it was under the George W. Bush administration that they came up with this Postal Accountability Enhancement Act. Which,
Don't you
among
love the
other-
names? Don't you love the
Oh,
names?
yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it looks so nice, you
Yeah.
know? Let's be accountable, let's enhance the Postal Service. But it required the Postal Service to pay 75 years out retiree health benefits and a 10-year, 75 years of health benefits, it had to fund them each year for a 10-year period, which costs us $5.5 billion a year. Now, when the Reorganization Act set
It
us up
doesn't
on these...
even make sense.
Well, it didn't then either, but I don't know why they passed it to begin with, but I would assume somebody didn't read the thing. But if you're trying to break even over a 10-year cycle and you need all the money that you're making in that 10-year cycle to function, and somebody comes up and says, you got to give us $5.5 billion a year for no apparent reason at all, these people haven't been born yet, well, as you can probably anticipate, the Postal Service went belly up financially in 2012. They couldn't do it anymore. What a lot of people don't realize is before this PAEA was signed into law, the Postal Service was doing great, and they were on the point of converting all of their fleet to green energy vehicles, meaning there'd be charging stations all over the country, there'd be fuel cell...
They've been criticized for that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just recently it's come up again, but back before the PAEA, that was what they were going to do.
That was their-
That would have gone so far to cure the climate situation, because you wouldn't have to be afraid for buying an electronic vehicle or electric vehicle, because you could go anywhere in the country and find a charging station. So when this PAEA took effect, they had to scrap that plan. So the people lost twice. They lost their service, and they lost the opportunity to do something about the climate situation. So anyway, when the Postal Service went belly up financially, they were still obligated to pay the remainder of that money. There were $34 billion of their money that
It was already set there.
It was already in the
It
Treasury.
was already set there.
Waiting for these 75-year-old retirees that haven't been born yet. And they started closing facilities, consolidating, cutting services. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in the country that didn't feel the impact of that. And especially the workers. A lot of workers were forced to, go from, like Mid-Hudson, for example, their facility closed. The mail was sent to Albany. So they were forced to either move to Albany or commute until they had enough years to retire.
It just was such a bad plan.
It was, and you have to understand that there was some fossil fuel industry shenanigans going on there.
Well, the lobbyists.
Yeah,
they get in
because they
there.
wanted to quash that opportunity.
Yeah,
to go
we
with
don't
green
want them to
vehicles.
have electric cars. We've
Right.
got to continue to buy this fossil.
216,000 car fleet or vehicle fleet would have been converted. That's quite a chunk. That's not like, that's not a small thing.
Yeah, well, they realized that. The oil industry certainly realized that they were going to get cut out of that.
And this bill also benefited the privatizers because it would have it crippled the Postal Service, made them look like they couldn't perform their function, and it would lead people to call for private industry to take over. So there were two things going on there. They had some contracting out to Staples.
And that was before DeJoy.
Oh, yeah, this was way back in, I think it was...
Who went on to try and disseminate it even further. So.
Right, well, he had his own
agenda.
Goals,
Yeah.
right. So then they had these issues with Staples, where they were contracting out or outsourcing our work to Staples stores. The teachers helped us quash that tremendously. They refused to purchase their materials from Staples, so Staples was abandoned. They had a similar situation with Sears, and the public came to our defense by cutting up their credit cards. So Sears abandoned that. So as you do, and as I do, the general public loves their Postal Service. They don't want people messing with it.
Don't mess with it.
And you know, it's nice that they
It's
don't...
secure and it's worked. So
It works fine. It works
Yeah.
fine. We know what we're doing, you know?
No, absolutely.
Leave it alone.
Well, I know that we're close to being at the end of this segment, because you're going to be on next week as well to talk about it. But I do want to mention that in today's paper, or today's news, let's give the people a teaser of what's coming up in our next show. And
Well, there's
how
some good
this is
news
going.
on the horizon. There was
Yeah.
legislation that was passed that relieved us of the continuing debt of the PAEA and gave us control of that $34 billion.
PAEA, what is that?
The Postal Accountability Enhancement Act.
Okay.
So it also gave us an opportunity to use that $34 billion that they took from us. And the legislation was passed in the Senate, and it was...
We're waiting, though.
No, it's passed. It's
The Senate, but doesn't it have to be?
the House passed it first last month.
Okay, so it's been passed in both houses. It has to be signed now.
It should be signed any minute now, I
Yeah,
hope.
and I'm sure it will be.
But there was a 79-19 vote, so you can see there was bipartisan support in the
Support.
Senate. 79 senators
I want to
voted.
know who those 19 are.
I
That's
do,
what I
too.
really want to
do,
know.
too.
Because
But I
I'm
can
going to
pretty
write
much-
them a letter.
I can pretty much guess who they are.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's for the next show, and
Yeah.
I just want to put a little seed in the viewer's mind. There is a program called The Great Postal Hike. I saw it on Tubi, a streaming service. It does an
The
excellent...
Great Postal
The Great Postal Heist.
Heist.
It goes
Like
over
a
all the
steal.
stuff I've been telling them about, but it says it so much more eloquently, and it's an
Well, you're
actually...
doing darn good.
It's an actual movie, like an hour and a half movie, that goes over all the years of trouble that the employees were facing after negotiations started, because the Postal Service did not like having a union. Like, I don't think any service or business does.
Yeah, nobody
but-
wants to start out with one, yeah.
Well, they came down really hard on the workers, and you and I will remember when people would come into the workplace with shotguns. Well, it goes into some pretty major detail about all this information, and if anybody can catch it on Tubi, if they have that service, they should really check it out. I don't know where else it's available.
Well, I think if we just search on the internet, we'll find it. It's called The Great
Postal Heist. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that people did not, I shouldn't say this because that's a generalization that people, I hate that when you say the people, because we don't know what everybody's thinking, but I was not aware of a lot of the things that you've told me. And I think I was more aware when I saw what was happening in the past 3 or 4 years with the Postal Service, which made me more cognizant of the past. And so I started kind of poking around there. But you have really distilled it.
Well, I wish I had known about your show 30 years ago, because I would
Yeah.
have started talking about it then.
Well, I hope maybe another 30, well, I don't think I'll be around in 30 years, but
But I don't know,
anyway.
we probably don't have enough time in this segment, but the next segment I'll get into the
Yeah,
Postmaster
next segment
General
we'll do
and
that. I want to thank you,
legislation.
Jim, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the 13th to talk about the other half of this story. And who knows, there might even be part 3 or 4, who knows, who knows. I find this so fascinating.